Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we welcome back an old high school teacher of mine. And old, I mean, I was...
He means it.
No, old, I mean... you were my teacher in high school.
That's right.
And so we wanted to have you back on the show because we just celebrated the 4th of July. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of food that day and a lot of fireworks. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted you to give us some background on what this day really is. But first, before we go there, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for having me back.
We were so impressed with you the last time that we said we have to have this guy back for something else.
Thank you.
A little bit of background before we get into our discussion. You were a teacher. You were an old teacher at Central High School.
That's right. I was at Central from 1970 to 2004. And I had kids whose parents I had. And one day when I found out I had a kid whose grandfather I had, I said, that's it. I'm out of here.
So you retired from Central High School.
That's right.
Do you miss teaching?
Miss teaching? No. Miss the way education has become? No. Teaching was fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with kids. I enjoyed it. But too many things happened in society to make it unpleasant to be a teacher. And so I'm glad I was a teacher when I was a teacher, but I wouldn't be today.
Any advice for new teachers? Because, I just read something the other day that said they're going to be hiring X amount of teachers all over the state. Any advice you can give them?
Be prepared for anything. Cover yourself. Be sure to cover yourself. Document everything that needs documenting. And know your subject well. Know your subject well. Don't try to BS the kids or anybody else. Know your subject. And this will bring you respect from the kids, from your peers, I hope, and from their parents.
How did you engage? I know we're going off topic here, but
we are.
You've got so much information and so much knowledge because you've been teaching here locally for so long. How do you engage the parents? I mean, do you know when parents are interested in their kids' education?
Yes, in some cases. If they come to back to school or open house, that's one indication. If they call, if they sense a problem, or they come see you if they sense a problem, that's another indication. If they don't show up for any of these programs or don't care to meet the teacher, there's not too much can be done. You can't go pound on their door and say, hey, I'm your kid's teacher, you're going to listen to me. You know what they'll tell you.
Yeah.
But I think what I did was I wasn't afraid of, well, I guess Trump is an example. I wasn't afraid of bragging, of selling myself. I'm your kid's teacher. This is what I bring to the classroom. I've done this, that, and the other thing. I'm involved in this, that, and the other thing. I know this, that, and the other thing. So your kid is lucky. I'm lucky because your kid is my meal ticket for this year. But your kid's lucky because he or she is going to carry away some knowledge and some necessary skills.
Lastly, on that topic, I know that everybody says, oh, teachers, they're off 3 months a year and life is great because, you should be a teacher. I had people tell me this, you should be a teacher because you're off 3 months out of the year. But in reality, are you working in those 3 months?
Yeah, you are. Yes, you are. Of course you are. You're gathering stuff. At least I was gathering stuff to make it more interesting for myself and for the class, to engage them, to get them to enjoy being there. School is like a job. You can like it or not like it, but you've got to be there. And better if you like it. And I tried to do that. And as far as getting the 3 months off, and people say, oh, you get paid for 12 months, you know, no. They take your salary and they divide it, you see. And so, yes, you get your pay during the summer vacation, but it's money you have earned. There are ways, I guess you can, at least you used to be able to insist on having all of your money from September through June, and then you didn't get any check in July or August. You'd better be very disciplined
to not spend
about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so now let's talk about the 4th of July, Mr.
Right.
Genini. The reason why I wanted you here is because, you know, I was having 4th of July with my family, and we were doing some fireworks, the legal kind, not the ones that shoot in the air. And,
Yeah, I know.
but I wanted to just bring you here because I wanted to ask you, not even me, you know, I'm guilty of it too, because I don't exactly know the details. I know the background of the story, but I don't know the details. Why do we celebrate 4th of July?
Well, specifically when the Declaration of Independence was adopted, John Adams, very, very active in the Continental Congress, pushing Jefferson, as well as Franklin, also pushing Jefferson to write the thing. Franklin said that this day, you know, should be observed with fireworks, with rockets, with parades, et cetera, et cetera. This, to celebrate, you know, this is something to celebrate. People did this. When nations won wars, or there was a new prince born, or something like that, that government would set off firework displays to, you know, impress the public. It's nice. You liked them, didn't you?
I liked them a lot.
Sure, you see. So there, okay? Hasn't changed that much.
What was in this document, the Declaration of Independence, that made it so valuable, made it so celebratory?
Well, first of all, understand it has no legal standing, as I understand, as I've always heard it. You know, a lawyer can't cite it as a support. Yeah, but we all know it is one of our fundamental documents. And if there hadn't been a declaration, there wouldn't have been a constitution, which is citable. The Declaration of Independence, well, for the first time in the history of the world, a colony declared itself independent of the parent state, the mother country. Hadn't happened before, ever. First time. And it was a list of reasons of why we have a grievance. We've mentioned this grievance. It hasn't been addressed. It hasn't been taken care of. No redressment from the royal government. This is why we are declaring our independence. We have been denied the rights that Englishmen in England had. We're just as, they were saying, and we're entitled to those same rights. We've been denied them. Point. The king has done this, that, and the other thing. The king is a tyrant. Now, really, King George was not a tyrant. They want to see tyrants, you can look at Stalin or Hitler. You can see real tyrants. But the king was arbitrary, and as one British school book from the early 20th century referred to the king as very stubborn and self-willed. He was. Well, what did this book say? This will explain in a nutshell what brought this about. Having done one unlawful and foolish thing, it did another. It punished the people of Boston for the riot, meaning the Boston Tea Party, and even took away the parliament of the colony. This was more than flesh and blood could stand, and the Americans began to prepare for war. King George was very stubborn and self-willed. He called the Americans rebels and sent soldiers across the sea to fight them. "We will soon bring them to their senses," he said. Soon, 20,000 Americans were in arms. And that's the way they see it. They even see the justice of it. The reasons Jefferson put in were also to tell the world why we were doing this. As I said, this was something that had never been done before. And to get help, if possible, or at least no hostility, if possible, from great powers like France or Spain, which, of course, happened.
So I don't mean to cut you off there.
Sure.
So they thought that maybe if England were to get mad at them and invade or come to their territory, England might bring France and someone else.
Yeah, well, England did bring the Hessians. King George was related to the King of Hanover in Germany, and he asked him for help. And the king of Hanover did provide thousands of Hessian troops. Many of them stayed in the United States after the war and became good Americans, but at the time they weren't welcomed. Interesting footnote on that too. My wife's family has been in America since the 17th century.
Wow.
They didn't go to Salem, so that's why she's here. They weren't caught up in the witch trials, but they were here before the witch trials in Massachusetts. And in fact, she had ancestors who fought on both sides in the Revolution.
Wow.
The ones who who were loyal ran away to Canada after the war, which was what many of them did. But she had, well, it wasn't a direct ancestor, but it was the brother of her sixth great-grandfather, who was a chaplain and was the first chaplain killed in the Revolutionary War, probably the first chaplain killed in any American war, I guess, who wrote a letter to his wife on Christmas Day in 1776, being Presbyterian. They didn't celebrate Christmas. The Puritans and the Presbyterians did not celebrate Christmas.
Interesting.
But it was too Catholic, and they didn't want anything to do with that. So he writes a letter to his wife the night before the Battle of Trenton, where Washington crosses the Delaware and surprises the Hessians at a Christmas party and wins the battle. First battle he wins. This is what he writes to his wife, though. This man writes to his wife. The important crisis seems to draw near, which might decide the query whether Americans shall be slaves or free men. May God grant the latter, however dear it may cost.
Interesting.
Interesting, he refers to Americans, not New Hampshiremen, not Virginians, not Georgians, not New Yorkers, Americans. 2 years earlier, it would have been the other way around. Somehow they had a feeling. They got a feeling this way. This is interesting.
How do you think Americans supported themselves? I mean, here they are thousands of miles away, and they're, in essence, building a new government. In essence, they're saying, you know what? We don't want anything to do with this king anymore.
That's right.
We're going to govern our own self. How did they do it?
Each colony was now a state, called itself a state, and overthrew the royal authority that was there. Sometimes just saying, buzz off. In some cases, actually physically arresting them. Whatever it was, they wrote new constitutions. In some cases, the new constitutions were only new in that they removed any referral to the crown. Okay. In others, they actually wrote a new system of government. Each of the 13 were still, as far as they were concerned, 13 independent little nations.
Wow.
Joined together, at least in alliance, for this common cause. All right. They knew they had to stay together, but were they going to stay together after the war? That's a whole other matter. When the war ended, when independence came, they were not necessarily of a mood to stay. It took a while, but it came together. Interesting thing here about that is that the effect it had on in families. We were in Savannah, Georgia, about 8 or 9 years ago, It happened to be by their old cemetery, and I noticed the last royal governor of Georgia's sons, all 4 sons went over to the revolution. Now imagine, you're a father, I'm a father, understand, how does that feel when your family splits that radically? Your children go 180 from where you are, where you were. This happened in families, and it happened in communities where neighbors who had been friends turned on each other in some cases. You had in the country about, they always estimated, 1/3 of the people were patriots, rebels, okay, committing treason, and could have been hanged, okay. You have 1/3 who are loyalists, and naturally, they supported their government. You're loyal to the U.S. government. I am. You know what I'm saying? You're loyal. You had another 1/3 who are typical throughout the history of the world and in all humanity, who sit on the fence and watch and see who is going to win. We're with them, So you had this, and the loyalists could be pretty mean. The patriots could be pretty mean, and people were killed, tortured, lost all their property, whatever. It was bad. The British could have hanged or shot as traitors all of the rebels. They could have hanged them, formally hanged them, charged them with treason and tried them, and a few minutes later have them executed. But they didn't, for one good reason, one practical reason. If they did that, the patriots and others might turn really viciously on the loyalists. And so they didn't want to do that. The British depended on the help of the loyalists, especially in the South, especially in South Carolina, they did, and in Georgia also, some. But they didn't get that much, but oh well. It's amazing. Go ahead.
Why is it important for us to know the background of the day? I mean, a lot of people have the day off.
Yeah, I know.
A lot of people are with family, barbecuing,
Right.
having a good time.
Sure.
But, and you probably know more about this than I do based on your experience in life. There may be people out there that really don't know why we're celebrating.
There are, believe me, there are. I've known some.
Why is it important for us to still know?
Well, why is it important for us to know the background of any holiday or any observance? It's our country's birthday. If you care about your country at all, this is true anywhere in the world, if you care about your country at all, you care about how you came to be. What makes you distinct from another country? How did this happen? What did people do for it? In this case, people fought for it. They risked their lives. They risked their property. They risked their reputations. They risked everything. For what? They went up, these American patriots went up against the country with the biggest army and the biggest navy and a humongous treasury in the world. They did that, and they took a chance. Had the British won the war, had the revolution failed, Washington and the others would not just have lost their lands, and they were extensive. They would not have just lost their lands, they would have lost their lives. And it wouldn't have just been bang, It would have been still hanging, drawing, and quartering.
Wow.
Yeah, taken to England and hanged, drawn, and quartered. They still treated rebels that way, that late.
The world, not just our country, the world would have been completely different had they lost that battle.
That's right. In fact, back in the 60s, when I was in college, I read a fascinating book. I don't remember the author's name, but the book's title was For Want of a Nail. That the Americans lost the Battle of Saratoga. Therefore, France does not become an ally. The French got into it because they saw the Americans could probably win, and they wanted to get back at England for other things, for taking Canada away from a few years before. But we wouldn't have won the Battle of Saratoga. The revolution would have been crushed. This book is a fictional history with all kinds of footnotes from real sources that aren't real. In other words, citing the New York Times for articles that never appeared in the 1860s and so forth. It's a history of the world as it would be without the Americans winning the revolution, without a United States. And the world would have been so different, so different. Well, we in California would still be part of the Spanish Empire. Not Mexico. Mexico would not have become independent either. There would have been no inspiration from the American Revolution. Russia would still have a czar. There probably would not have been a World War II because you wouldn't have had a World War I, you see. Everything would have been different.
We wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here.
Talking about this on
We
this
would not
program.
be here. You'd still be, well, you'd be in Armenia, I'd be in Italy or Switzerland, okay? Or the south of France, I'd be there. My wife would, well, she'd be here, but she'd be in New England, in Massachusetts or New Hampshire. You know, here we are. See, this is where it's important. This is where America, this is America's birthday. And this is why we should acknowledge it, and we should know. Even if you don't know anything more about it than that, you should at least take away from it that day. This is the day our country declared its independence. Didn't become free, but declared its independence. So one thing where you say, well, gee, I'm free, but if I can't back it up,
Right,
you know.
right.
It wasn't until 1783 that the Treaty of Peace between Britain and the U.S., and also France and Spain as our allies, but between Britain and the U.S., where Britain recognized our independence. And they really mentally probably didn't recognize it until after the War of 1812. Sometimes some historians have called it the Second War of American Independence. But after that, there was no longer any question that we were our own nation.
The Declaration of Independence, again, you talked about it a little bit, but who were the drafters? I mean, who were they, and where did they fit in the line of being American, or who were they?
What? Yeah, okay. Well, the First Continental Congress, which met from 1774 to the beginning of 75, just said we're going to meet again. We've sending these petitions to the king. You know, let's see what he does. You know, where is it? You never wait. You know, here they are. Second Continental Congress is called. Battles occur at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts on April the 18th in 1775. First battles of the Revolution was the beginning of it. Americans win. Little battles, but Americans win. In October of 75, the king declares us in rebellion. It wasn't until until really the 2nd of July that Congress voted for independence. That's how long they wait. So people who complain today about Congress taking forever, at the beginning, I mean, fighting starts in April. The king says it's a rebellion in October. Congress doesn't agree until the next year in July.
Wow.
But seriously, at the beginning of June, it was resolved by the Congress that a declaration, some statement had to be written to tell the world, Britain and the world, and the American people why this was happening. And so Jefferson was was the one who was to write it. Adams and Franklin were supposed to make him do it. He didn't want to do it. He was newly married. He'd want to go back to Virginia to his wife. But they persuaded him. Adams finally figured that the best way to get him to write, because he was dilly-dallying, he couldn't come up with the right words, was to send for his wife.
Interesting.
She came to Philadelphia, and now he was inspired. And he wrote. And he presented it to Congress, and it was quite a bit longer than the one we have. There was a lot of argument in, add this, take out that, add this, take out that, in, out, in. There was a lot of argument. There was a discussion. Probably the most significant one was about slavery. Jefferson, who was himself a slave owner, criticized the king for for facilitating the import of African slaves. Of course, African kings caught people and sold slaves to Arab and European and American traders on the West African coast, and they brought them to the Americas. But blamed the King of England. Why not? Well, yes, because in Georgia, for example, Georgia was supposed to be slave-free, but the British government forced it on them because of economic reasons. But he wanted to blame the king for that, but Rutledge of South Carolina said, no way, you're not attacking that. We're not going with you if you do, simple as that. And so to appease him, they pulled it, okay?
Interesting.
And there were other things, too, that were in that one colony wanted, another one didn't, or put this in, sure, take that out, no, back and forth, arguing over calling the king a tyrant.
Interesting.
You know? But he's your king, you can't call him a tyrant. Yeah, but he is, I don't care, he is a tyrant.
Mr. Genini,
So there.
we are out of time this week on the
Lord.
program. I could tell you and I have hours and hours of stuff that we could talk about on this topic, but
Well, the war went on for a lot of years.
well, for now,
For now.
for now, I'll say thank you for joining us again. We will have you back in the future, and we'll continue this conversation.
Be glad to. Be glad to.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that make this production and every production possible, we couldn't do it without you, and we couldn't have this program without those listening to the broadcast on 90.7 FM or watching us on CMAC, Comcast 93, and AT&T 99. For guest Ron Genini, Mr. Genini, and myself, host Sevag Tateosian, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week for a new edition.